by Mrs. Sabina Higgins.
So, While mar dús fáilte fé choráibh go léir go dtí nóáil súntaach seo, While go háirithe fáilte chomh raibh Uachtarán na hÉireann agus a bhean Céile Sabina, tá fáilte raibh an beartach go dtí Ollscoil na hÉireann Gaillimh. Uachtarán na hÉireann, Mrs. Higgins, distinguished visitors, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to welcome back to the campus all of you here this afternoon, and in particular I'm delighted to welcome the President of Ireland, Micheal D Higgins, and his wife Sabina on their second official visit to the institution. I'd like to share with our visitors the great sense of pride we have in welcoming back to his campus, to his university, President Micheal D Higgins. Micheal D is the 9th President of Ireland and the first NUI Galway graduate to hold that office. 50 years ago, 1962, Micheal D made a life-changing choice when he enrolled as a mature student in this university. Since then, he's been extremely linked with our university as a student and very active in student life, becoming president of the Student Council in his day. Gone on to become a very highly regarded lecturer, a very popular lecturer in sociology and politics for very many years, serving as adjunct professor of human rights in our Centre of Human Rights. On a personal level, I've known Micheal D since I was a student here in the 1970s, and I've always had great regard for him, and I'm delighted to have him in the university. I think throughout his career, going right back to his early days as a student, he has had a commitment to education which is very, very welcome. He was a mature student, he was a student rep, he was an academic, he was an author and a holder of public office, and in all those roles I think he was very supportive of education, and indeed the importance of promoting ideas in education and beyond education. I'm very happy he's here with us today to establish and to, in effect, to launch this 4th International Disability Summer School. In his own words, this university, this campus, seeks to be a leader in civic engagement. Our philosophy of scholarship in action encourages academics and students to use their knowledge to address challenges which are faced by society and try to contribute solutions to those very big questions. We take great pride in what we term active scholarship, and we encourage our students through, for example, service learning and indeed through volunteering. Last year alone, almost 1,000 students in this university were formally recognised by the institution for their participation in our so-called ALIVE programme. ALIVE is the learning initiative and volunteering experience programme which we have in the university to encourage and recognise and reward those students who contribute to society through volunteering. I must say I've personally been very impressed at our effort over the past 10 years to engage student volunteering, to engage service learning. I think it's now firmly embedded as part of our culture, and I believe it's also a testament to the legacy of people like Micheal D Higgins and his colleagues who over the years were always very strong on this question. We're always very strong on the role of university in society. And their if you like, their legacy is there with us now in that volunteering programme, which is so well established here. Can I turn now to the Centre for Disability Law and Policy at NUI Galway, and indeed to the United Nations Declaration or Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. An important result of that UN treaty has been that there's been a growth of interest in this area right around the world. And a whole set of new centres of disability law and policy are now to be found in countries like South Africa, Switzerland, United States, and indeed China. In fact, I believe we have a representative here today from Renmin University Centre on Disability Law, and those representatives are certainly very welcome to Galway. Our centre was established in 2008 and has gone on since to have a tremendous influence in this university and indeed beyond the university. We've been active at European level and have also been active in terms of the support for drafting of that UN treaty. All of this under the tremendous leadership of Professor Gerard Quinn. To give you some sense of the activity here in that centre directs a major European research network of 14 PhDs working on the treaty. They published a major study with the UN on the right to community living. They published 5 books on this topic since 2008, have secured significant United Nations research funding, and indeed have secured lots of European funding, lots of framework funding to support their efforts. Also, and very importantly, established last year the first master's programme in international and comparative disability law with the support of the Soros Foundation. And that programme is led by Dr. Siobhan Quinlivan from the law school. And I thank her for her leadership in that. Our centre also works with law schools in Latin America and Africa, again funded by the Soros Foundation. I think that activity in particular builds on knowledge and skills in those countries and continues our record as a country of working in development countries. The centre has now become part of a larger initiative on the university campus. We have created a so-called Life Course Institute. This institute draws from the disciplines of economics, social policy, sociology, and law, and it focuses on the key challenges which face individuals and society right across the life course, affecting children, affecting families, older people, and people with disabilities. And this, in my view, is the way to proceed. We know that the EU Horizon Programme 2020 talks about dealing with grand social challenges. And in my view, work which is cross-disciplinary and addresses the life course and addresses issues as cross-cutting as disability rights are precisely in line with that type of thinking. And I certainly welcome the support of the Commission for that type of thinking. It's also true to say that working together, working, as if you like, as part of a life course, we in some sense leverage and multiply the work of the Disability Centre. I would also like to thank Atlantic Philanthropies for their tremendous support for the centre over the years, and indeed for their support for the Life Course Institute, which is now being created. So this summer school is the 4th summer school organised by the centre. The first 2 focused on European disability law and policy and were funded by the European Commission. Last year's was funded by Atlantic Philanthropies, as indeed is this year's, and I thank Brian Carney-Grieve, who's in the audience, for that support. It's greatly appreciated. We are also supported this year by the Soros Foundation, who are sponsoring 8 full scholarships for advocates from all over Africa, and those advocates are certainly welcome here. We're supported also by the Commonwealth Secretariat in London, which has nominated participants from Trinidad and Pakistan. And indeed, the many connections between this university, through our Centre for Disability Law and Policy, and the Commonwealth Secretariat, in the very broadest sense, is a symbol of the re-engagement across our islands, which is so welcome, and it shows the possibility of re-engagement across our islands to deal with these kinds of issues. I am told this is the largest summer school of this type in the world. There are, I believe, 29 nationalities represented here, from China to Zambia. And this, of course, is as it should be, because the challenges which are presented by this theme are certainly global challenges. The school is directed and co-directed by Professor Michael Steen of Harvard Law School and Professor Gerard Quinn of this university. I know of the deep links exist between our colleagues in Harvard and ourselves, and that's greatly to be encouraged and greatly to be supported by the university. The faculty for the summer school is also truly global. It involves people who are active in drafting the UN Convention and who are leading thought leaders in this area around the world. I'd like to thank in particular Professor Theresa Degener from Germany, who sits on the UN Committee on the Rights of People with Disabilities. Professor Degener is one of the key drafters of the treaty and now helps to, if you like, oversee the process of monitoring the implementation of it around the world. The main purpose, of course, of the seminar is to give you the delegates the possibility to try to understand how to implement the treaty, no matter where you live. And I certainly hope that the conference and the seminar fulfil this need in that regard, and I'm sure it will. Before I conclude, could I first of all thank all the contributors and the speakers, thank in particular and acknowledge the work of the conference organisers, Professor Quinn and his team, and thank you delegates for coming here to Galway for this event. I hope you're very fruitful and very productive stay in Galway, and if the weather improves, I hope you have a chance to see a bit more of Galway. So, B'Waithe Nish, Rish fáilte corvan an Uachtar Micheal D Higgins agus a ban céile agus Beidir Micheal sásta cúpla focail ar áilih. Gur míle mágah. Thank you very much.
Uachtaráin Alscail na Gáilibh náisiúnta is gine córa fáta fiorcin ósam léh agus bu is mín lam a bhuichas a ggóil as an chuir tíocht. President of NUI Galway, Dr. James Brown, Professor Gerard Quinn, and staff of the Centre for Disability Law and Policy, members of the governing body, students, ladies and gentlemen, particularly distinguished visitors from abroad. I am delighted to be here today and to be asked to launch the 4th International Summer School in partnership with the Harvard Law School project on disability, and which this year is going to concentrate on the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. May I say immediately I am delighted to hear again from Dr. Brown the emphasis on active scholarship. I'm always pleased to find myself back occasionally in university settings. I believe that it is a time of intellectual crisis in the world, and particularly in European scholarship, where active scholarship is needed now. Not, I think, any longer when I was a student all those years ago for the extension of the public world, but I think active scholarship may be necessary to recover the public world, because in so many different areas of policy there has been the sacrificing of legitimacy, the erosion of legitimacy, and indeed in many areas of scholarship with which I was associated in the social sciences, we are paying a heavy price for the tyranny of hegemonic models that were set against any form of inclusion or the extension of citizenship in a general sense, be it in terms of class or gender or socioeconomic variables. I had the opportunity of exchanging views with Professor Howard Stein of Michigan University recently on this topic, and we agreed, but I am leaving my critique of the Chicago School over for another day. May I say that I'm very conscious of the context as well of your international summer school. The context is one that is very, very important, because indeed the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and your own work, occurs in another context. For example, the issues you discuss are not separate from issues that arise in relation to development theory and policy. There is now, I think, a welcome and growing demand that there be a human rights-driven development strategy, and the current consultation in relation to Irish development policy abroad has had that point made to it. I think that that is as it must be, as we must try to move from what might be a state-defined needs basis in development thinking to one in which is human rights driven. And indeed, of course, as Professor Quinn has pointed out to me more than once, the greatest invisibility in relation to human rights is those, for example, who are suffering from disabilities in what are described as the developing world or receiving worlds in terms of development aid and assistance. As to the convention, it is a convention that I strongly support, and which in my previous existence as a public representative I called upon successive governments to ratify. And I am aware of the monist and dualist argument in relation to the ratification of conventions, but I do still think, therefore, that it makes it all the more pleasant and gratifying that I have the opportunity to speak to you today at this important event. As you will be aware, all of you, many countries in progressing the disability issue have taken the United Nations Standard Rules on equalisation of opportunities for people with disabilities as their benchmark, the benchmark document in developing their own strategies. And it's these rules that were the springboard for action, highlighting as it did the plight of people with disabilities who were clearly seen to be at risk of having their rights denied or ignored at the level of social policy. In 2006, almost 13 years later, the United Nations Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities was published, and Ireland became a signatory in March 2007. Ratification of this convention, as I have said, awaits enactment of legislation. However, in order to ensure that this ratification is effective and productive, and I agree with this, Ireland will not ratify until ready to fully apply the convention. This, of course, is not an excuse for delay or any dilatory practice in relation to drafting legislation. The enactment, for example, in the Irish case, the enactment of new mental capacity legislation is the main issue here, and it will be required prior to ratification of the convention. When I was inaugurated last year as President of Ireland, I stated that in implementing the mandate I have been given, I will seek to achieve an inclusive citizenship where every citizen participates and everyone is treated with respect. This is a discourse I have sought to continue. And reflecting back, therefore, on our own experience in Ireland, there was a time when Ireland depended largely on a programme of incarceration and segregation in its response to disability issues. In fact, it has been the case that until relatively recently, persons who experience mental illness were largely invisible within our society, sometimes denied their basic human rights, and warehoused, I think is the word I would use, in institutions disconnected from the community, pushed to the margins, the periphery of normal everyday life. As a sociologist, I say, such an approach had as its defining feature the removal or the denial or the ignoring of the discretion of the citizens involved. Thankfully, we have in recent decades seen a seismic change in society's attitude to fellow citizens living with disabilities and how these citizens are viewed and treated. An important key milestone on this journey to change was the publication of a Green Paper in 1984, highlighting the priority areas that would need to be addressed in order to facilitate the social inclusion of people with disabilities. A further milestone was the acceptance of the need to engage a mainstream response to the disability question in Ireland, and that acceptance led to the establishment of the Commission on the Status of People with Disabilities in 1993. I had the honour of serving in government with Mervyn Taylor, who was the first Minister for Equality and who dealt with this issue with the Commission. The Commission reported on what needed to be put in place for people with disabilities in order that they could achieve social inclusion and equal participation. And in drawing up this report, we Irish as a nation accepted that the United Nations Standard Rules was a key document in the future development of disability policy. And following the recommendations set out in the report of the Commission, a national disability strategy was launched in 2004. We have, therefore, I think, come a long way from the days when disability meant automatic segregation, disenfranchisement, or being placed at the margins or even outside of normal society. But despite these advancements, however, there remains the important issues to be addressed and implemented. I suggest that if we are to have a truly inclusive citizenship, we need to acknowledge the importance of all citizens being accorded equal recognition as a person before the law. Denial of this basic right diminishes, dilutes, or simply denies all other rights. On the other hand, an admittance of this truth is a statement of recognition and understanding of the critical need to provide the appropriate supports to people with disabilities in order that they can be allowed to exercise their legal rights. And it forces us to confront some of the fundamental issues around the equality of people, for example, with a mental disability, which include combating stigma and discrimination against persons with disabilities, promoting human rights, including, as I mentioned, the question of human rights in development policy, promoting changes in attitudes and behaviour, and changes too, I suggest, which is often the most difficult, I say, as having been a member of a cabinet and being as well a long-time parliamentarian, and indeed as being president, changes in discourse, the way these issues are addressed and spoken of providing supports to and opportunities to allow those with mental health problems to more fully contribute to their communities, their society and their country. Indeed, I have to say that a cursory glance at anthropology would suggest that there is evidence there that shows how quite sophisticated strategies of inclusion existed in indigenous wisdom of some ancient societies. But moving on, if we are to effectively address these critical issues, we must look to the general principles contained in Article 3 of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. These principles support and value the innate dignity and autonomy of persons living with disability and espouse their freedom to make their own choices. They also recognise their right to be participative citizens whose individual voices and unique skills, opinions and energy can contribute so much to society. We must therefore, I suggest, seek to move to a culture of assisted citizenship, where a member of society with a mental disability may receive appropriate support in making decisions without relinquishing their right to actually make the decision themselves. In this way, what is ensured is that freedom of choice is not withheld from those with mental disabilities, and that society relates to them in a way that does not diminish their right to exercise legal capacity. If alternatively we deprive citizens of the right to represent themselves and to make important decisions regarding their lifestyle and their medical care, we are failing to promote their inclusion in society, and we are contradicting the principles to which we should aspire. Principles which espouse the upholding of a social rather than a medical model of disability, and which require the integration of the fields of mental health law, non-discrimination and legal capacity. And in these areas, the progress towards the necessary integration and discourse has been slow, excessively slow. Indeed, I must say as well, though, however, it is positive and encouraging that thinking in relation to disability in this country by government departments, service providers and people with disabilities has moved away from responding to disability solely as a health issue, and we are seeing an increasing and welcome recognition of disability as a social concern and of the need for different measures to be implemented in order to change people's attitudes and reduce the stigma associated with disability. We accept, however, that more has to be done in our quest to tackle these difficulties, and I hope that over your summer school over the next week, while accepting that developments are already made, you will be able to discuss and explore, indeed as the President has said, how best we can adapt the legislative developments already achieved in order that those developments can satisfy the requirements of the Convention. This is such an admirable project, and it would be a real achievement, and it is of course quite feasible, by adopting a collaborative approach and working closely together to maximise the effectiveness that harnessing the resources and skills that are present at your school can bring. So once again, I want to thank President Brown. I want to thank particularly Professor Gerard Quinn, I had the great honour of appointing to the Council of State to be available to me on issues of constitution, should I need that. And I think that it is a very, very important school. And I'm very, very pleased to have the opportunity of returning to this institution for which I have such a long connection, and which contributed to which I'm so grateful for allowing me to develop what I hope is some contribution to critical scholarship. And critical scholarship is, I end where I began. I believe there is no more urgent time among intellectual workers than at the present time. I have to say that in every single area of the social sciences, I have been quite horrified to see, as it were, all those gains that are made in terms of the legitimacy of the publics, the great struggles that were there for the extension of democracy, to some extent be placed in peril with unaccountable mechanisms, as I say again, of single models without scholarly, without intellectual, and indeed without moral justification, such as the one that I referred to. And that is the context within which your discussion takes place. You can no longer assume that we are evolving, moving slowly towards the extension of rights in any area. It is now a matter of securing the ground. It is a matter of once again advocating the principles and stressing them upon which we want as human beings in our shared vulnerable planet to be more responsible, and not recognising, as it were, artificial barriers through the misuse of culture, for example, that stand in the way of the vindication of the rights you will address this week. May I thank you for your very warm welcome. May I hope that you wish you gwym gagrahagas banach ar an obar me siúlagi san seocht an atolia tíocht agus cumalish sin you're a fellowship to the natiri sulas ar I hope that in this ongoing, I hope once again that this week will be really productive for you academically and professionally, and also in helping you to use the convention to remove such barriers as may exist that will help people with disabilities to have the resources made available to them as will enable them to live their lives as independently as possible. And may I once again say to Gerard Quinn and to his colleagues, I'd like to thank the Centre for Disability Law and Policy for the very vital contribution you are making to informed thinking on disability-related policy and issues in this country. As President of Ireland, I thank you for that on behalf of all of the citizens of Ireland. And this summer school and the educational opportunities that you afford to students will help in policies and reforms such as are required to ensure that people with disabilities can be treated as equal citizens in Irish society. And when ratified, that the requirements of the Convention will become the benchmark for all disability-related policies. And thus we will have taken significant steps towards a kind of Irishness of which we can all be proud. Thank you very much.
In proposing a vote of thanks to Dr. Jim Brown and the President of Ireland, I will be mercifully brief because I know you've pressing engagements back in Dublin. This morning we were talking about deep theories of equality, and I do know that you have an equality right to food and a duty to eat, so I don't want to get in the way of that either. And it's this: what you leave behind is not what's engraved in stone monuments, but what is woven into the lives and hearts of others. And that was uttered by Pericles 2,500 years ago. And when looking back on my time as a student here, because the President was one of my lecturers, what was remarkable was that you never imparted inert units of information. You always opened windows onto people's minds and hearts and onto the world, and got them to connect what they were doing with the world at large. And it didn't really matter what they ended up doing, so long as there was this impulse to do something right as they saw it in the world. And I think it's that these are the great educators that we remember. We don't remember the people who packed our minds full of knowledge, but we remember the people who gave us a spark to go on and do different things. So now you're a teacher to the nation, and indeed a teacher to the world, and we're tremendously proud of you, and particularly your focus on inclusive citizenship. You have given rise to a whole genre of academics and others who are engaged in public service. Need I mention our current illustrious Attorney General, who's one of your graduates, and indeed our colleague Donncha O'Connell, who's now appointed to the government's Law Reform Commission, and we'll be talking to you later about that, Donncha. So without further ado, thank you very much, President Higgins and Sabina, for being here with us. The symbolism is very important, but I think practically speaking, it really gives us the spark in the summer school for the rest of the week. So Godspeed on your trip back, and we hope to see you again at some stage.